All right, so I'm going to call this Finance Committee meeting November 24th, 2021 to order with adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to adoption of the minutes of the regular Finance Committee, August 25th. Somebody want to move that for me? Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Ryan. All in favor? Motion carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to new business restart grants. Ms. McCabe, you're up.
This is the report and policy that we brought to council on October 26th. The council then referred to the finance committee. So I've just brought forward the report and then the policy. And then Taha, who also worked with me on this, he's here to answer any questions the committee has, or if any changes that you think should be made to the policy. It's being drafted based on some other communities. So we've got information from a few communities that have already done this. And then we pulled it together took the best of all of them, and pulled it together into this policy and put it in our format.
I'm getting bad URLs here, just bringing up that thing, so I'm going to just delete it and restart it again and see if so Jackie, Rob, any questions or comments on the restart grants or any of the stuff? No, I've got the minutes.
I have it on my
Oh, wait. Well, I'm not getting it on my iPad.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying. So that's.
But I've got it, so if you want my hard copy, you can.
Sure, okay, thanks.
That's the policy.
All right.
I'm in the same boat, Gary. I don't get it.
You're not getting it? I'm getting blank now.
Have you tried to log, because I actually am in it, but I just signed into agenda notes in this room. So,
I just pulled it up as well.
yeah. Sometimes I find if I'm logged into agenda notes somewhere else and then I forget to sign out.
Well, I'm just going to try to redeem
Oh,
it, see if we get anything.
I've got a hard copy if you want. Gary.
I've got the policy here.
I'm going to put it to so just to make sure it's up on the report. That's what it was.
Okay.
You want to read it? Yeah.
Speed.
I have some
I
questions.
thought I'd already read this
You did.
earlier, but it's just not coming up now. So, but we talked about this.
Yeah, it's the same report as it was in October, right? So I'm curious what the organization's feedback is, because it seems like the 80,000 is a bit of another. I know it's not intended to be an emergency relief, but it's like also a pretty short-term solution. I know I sit on the social development committee, but I don't know that I remember exactly what the response was about that specific 80,000. And I recall there being also a discussion about something that's like a little bit more long-term. So curious if we could maybe talk about that.
I think the organizations that sit on the committee and from around the community, to summarize kind of where they stand, every dollar that can be directed towards community service is one. So, I mean, the emergency, the amount of that was directed to 80,000, I think would make could make an impact in terms of responding to the ongoing and evolving nature of demand for social services. And today at the committee, we heard that had started to include a really increased demand for counseling services. Those services are really being stressed and could use support of this nature. So I could foresee the demand just shifting, just because we're moving further away from the imminent crisis of COVID and more into the longer term effects. And then, if we're talking, where this grant program fits within the entire response to COVID, I would kind of put this into the category of medium-term response. And then the longer-term response had always been slated as something that we could bring forward as we moved on.
And I could just jump in here because I had some notes here, like the first phase was emergency funding, $10,000
Yeah.
to keep loose. Phase 2 was really looking at their budget shortfalls, if they can demonstrate that their operational budgets have been impacted by the pandemic. The second phase of funding would allow them to replenish or, refurbish their ability to respond to whatever the needs are, including those kind of medium-term needs. It was very much based on, the first one was to getting money out to our clients. The second was, what are your budget shortfalls for the organization? The third phase was long-term capacity building and resilience. So,
Yeah.
that's all.
So maybe these the real question, what are the impacts? I mean, I know the federal government threw money like crazy into water unemployment, was laid off, was just given to you. That program has been ongoing for 2 years, effectively. And the guys that are really paying the price, the guys that can't get workers back.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, there's lots of support for social, lots of financial support thrown into the available.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, so what is, how much flexibility as a restart money can we use to generate a new idea or generate an economy rather than support stuff that's not really immediate or received? My perception is that we're not desperate. I don't see people line up on the street.
You should have been there at the meeting this morning.
Well, that's a good question.
No, totally.
Define it. I mean, so to me, who's using it? Yeah.
Well, you can share that, Jack, or you could, because.
Yeah, no, it was just like really interesting seeing all the different service providers talk about the differences and changes that they've seen. And not only has it been like pretty steep throughout the pandemic, but they're also seeing like a really steep increase right now.
So right now, why right now?
Well, because it's a mix of things, right? It's like the staffing shortages. There's, for some businesses, it's supply chain shortages, and they're worried about being able to like keep their businesses open. And there's more people accessing the food bank. There's more people accessing counseling services. There's more people like than ever, I think, requesting. Sheena was talking about like intake has just been like higher than ever.
For counseling and outreach. So
For counseling, yeah, counseling.
Counseling impacts are as people try to recover from the pandemic with all the supply chain issues and staffing issues.
Yeah.
People that are at the bottom really, need food and they're stressed to the max, and so they're needing counseling.
So you're saying counseling, people who stressed, the employers or the guys that, because the COVID support money is just ended. Right, it was very ample up to this point. It was probably better than our employment arrangement, right? So it was very good, and it was better than most people got a minimum wage job. They had better money coming in from COVID. So what was the stress for them? Maybe I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the ways to think about it is, COVID happened, it was like dropping the rock in the pond, and then there are ripples that we're seeing. And in the first ripple, that was immediate unemployment effects. That was immediate closures and isolation. And then maybe the second ripple we could think about is there were responses from federal and from other agencies to try to fund and alleviate that. And what I think you're speaking to in terms of people not choosing to take support and maybe the job market, they were less interested in the job market or able to step away from the job market and do something else. That was kind of the second ripple. And now the third one is that longer term mental health impact of isolation and anxiety is starting to mount. And that's what our service providers have expressed. They're starting to see in their program members.
So are we providing counseling to people who are mentally struggling? Is that what we're trying to do?
That's in part what there are a couple of counseling programs that are offered to, some people might not have benefits to be able to pay for that, or they might not have personal finances that meet that. And so we do have community counseling resources that exist within Community Connections and the Women's Shelter that try to meet that need, and they're seeing like the highest numbers that to date that they've seen
For counseling.
for counseling intakes.
But it's not like desperate.
Well, I think but the numbers at the food bank have also been up quite a lot.
You know, I can say poverty as a whole in Canada has been on a decline, right? And we do a food bank, and because we can generate food and the grocery stores and now have an avenue to get it to their stuff that they cancel to an agency that will supply it, are we creating the demand? You know, so it's there, so use it.
Right.
This used to be done by the churches, and now we're doing it by community connections. So what are we just transferring?
Well, we may be transferring, but we're into an organization now that is providing better quality and consistent food for those in need. So because I get a chance to see some of the organizations behind the scenes in my personal life, I actually can tell you that the quality of the food is improved and the consistency because we have the food bank. Now, having said that, there are more people willing to access the food bank who have employment, but it's not sufficient to meet their financial needs and feed their family. And so they're going, okay, I need to go once a week because I need to supplement. And they may not be going on food bank days, they may be going when they have a Wednesday drop-in or something like that to get fresh vegetables or whatever is available. Are we creating the need for that? Food banks, in my mind, were a short-term, temporary thing 15 years ago. Now they are the norm. It's not going to go away because we haven't figured out a way to make sure our people get enough money to meet their financial needs because our housing costs are up, the ability to live in a community like Revelstoke costs more, fuel costs more, everything costs more. And so people are utilizing this as a supplement, not because they're 100% dependent, some are, there's no doubt about it. Those who are on their lower echelon when it comes to income, just because, and it might be because they're seniors on pension, or it might be because that's just, you know, their lifestyle. They have insufficient means to be able to afford all of the needs. So this professional situation with Community Connections and the food bank and now with the new kitchen going in to teach people how to do things, because before they would maybe cook a little meal on a hot plate or a TV dinner, now they might be shown how to cook a meal, right? So you kind of look at that and go, unfortunately, Rob, I think it's here.
Well, I don't deny people, but I don't, you know, when I think of poverty, I don't see destitution on our streets.
But there's a spectrum, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Normally, what the food bank, the mustard seed, and all those things that I came from, you know, I grew up in the era I grew up in. This was the norm. You created the Salvation Army or all these different agencies supported people who were really down and out. And now we've got this very nice kitchen, and we have all the grocery stores supplying it, and maybe we just don't see it anymore.
Well, we don't see it physically on the street. You're not seeing, you know, lineups of people who are homeless for two reasons. Most people are couch surfing. They're not typically, you know, they've got their friends that are living on a couch, that sort of thing. They're not living on the street. However, I just came back from a service up at the cemetery, and there's a trailer kind of backed in Matt Singh's property with a big stovepipe coming out, and I'm going, those people are there for the winter.
Oh,
and that's what they're living in, a little old, very old travel trailer sort of thing, probably got permission or didn't to tuck it in the corner. And that's the reality of our world. And we're seeing that if you drive off, you know, you go down to the river and kind of drive in behind or go in behind, you're going to see many people living like that, or in a tin shack or whatever. So it's not out in the open, let's say, as we see in Kelowna on the streets, but it's very much valid in our.
Well, I think we're very lucky, you know, fortunate to be in the situation we are. And I had a conversation with someone from Downey the other day, and they have a starting wage of $29 an hour, and they can't get employees.
Yeah.
And I said, so I say, well, what's the real issue? You know, what are we saying? And I say, geez, you know, if they just need a body, there's lots of work out there, and people are all done. What are we trying to solve? Are we just enabling by providing these very elaborate services? Are we defeating it? What should we be achieving? So anyway, my point is we have a lot of money put into something that maybe we can all benefit from by having a strong, really robust communities, economic community, and then we can support all these other agencies without thinking too hard about it. No, and that's the situation we're currently in. We are already very fortunate and we have this access, so we just put it into a cause, and I'm not sure, are we creating the cause?
I think the cause was always there, speaking, sorry, off the cuff, I think, in a generation ago, it was taking care of the churches. People actually, being ties, with their faith communities, and that doesn't happen anymore. So now it is a public burden.
Well, I think churches are trying to stay viable in their own way, and one of their purposes was these various, United Church, for instance, used to be these soup kitchens.
Well, they're after the most vulnerable, and now that's shifted to social
Yeah, and I say
services. So it's always been there. It's nothing new. It's just revenue distribution has changed.
The other thing is we put more press into it, and there's more consumers, because there used to be very few people at the United Church. Now we have this lineup at the soup kitchen, I'm guessing.
There's probably, there are a couple ways of thinking about that, and I think where the discussion has moved is away from, maybe a previous discussion would have deterred people from using these services if they weren't considered appropriate for them, if they weren't really in need. And that could have been the type of discussion that gets had. And now I think it's moved on to a place of the less stigma that comes with these services and the wider acceptance of using them, the better. Because there might be a lot of people who feel ashamed of going to it, don't participate. And it's not necessarily to say that it's been the position that the wider access there is, even if there are that minority, like very small minority of people who, maybe they're not in as much need as the next person. The greater good is that more people have access, and that ends up supporting the job market and supporting the whole community in a positive direction, because someone who's just, made their heart on their luck this month, they attend, they might be ready to enter the job market next month. It's making up for those inefficiencies that we can't always track perfectly, but coming out with a stronger community on the whole.
And I would add that, it's been a perfect trifecta of food, shelter, and communities where people need to flourish, and housing and shelter, it's hard to come by, in a way that preserves your dignity, allows you to have some privacy. Food, we talked about, see low-hanging fruit, isolation, the pandemic has just made all that worse. And then any problems in those three areas, if you don't have all three together, then you start seeing the problems with, opiate addiction and overdose and all of the other social, really problematic long-term, and parenting and intergenerational trauma. And so looking after those basic needs can prevent the cost to our community of addiction and, spousal assault and all kinds of other things. So it's.
And just to build off that, I feel like part of what's so important about getting the basics in place and like putting these structures in place is not necessarily about what Revelstoke looks like right now, right? Even though we might not see it right now, the reality is that it's becoming more affordable, more people with money are coming here, and it's going to continue to become more unaffordable. And so what does that look like in 5-10 years? And do we want to be in a position where we're being so reactive at that point? Or do we want to have good structures in place so that we can support the most vulnerable people so that we don't just lose that dynamic? there are communities in the US that have that problem. I mean, I don't know if they would consider it a problem, but like people commuting an hour to town because they can't afford to live there, work there, eat there. So it's like, I mean, those are obviously extreme examples, but we would not want to have that happen. Like, we want to keep our community in our community, right?
I get it, but period. Poverty in Canada is being reduced. Statistics show it's been on a trend the last 10 years, 20 years. So I get that. I get that having a safety social net here is important, and that's value to our town. I get that, but it's just like we had a big kerfuffle over the temporary United Church converting to an emergency shelter in the wintertime. And I say, you know, having lived here for 15, 20 years, I had seen maybe 10 people homeless. Or 10 or 15 people homeless in that time. But the furor and the uproar that came from that thing, and the press and the it just fed off each other. And I said, the reality is we have a very limited. We're in a great position. We don't have the same thing. You go to Vernon, and there you see it all over the place. Here we don't.
You know, the good thing is about this morning, sorry to jump, but the kind of discussion on the table this morning too was about the fact that we, you know, were able to get funding with Taha's work with Mary Ann for emergency shelter. And the best thing about that infusion of funding, and they have arrangements now, community connections with different locales in town. So they have a standing pool of rooms they can send people to. It's finally going to actually give us the numbers that you're talking about. Because right now, everything else before this was an estimate. We think there's need, but we don't know. But this way, after a year of running this program for emergency housing, we'll actually know how many rooms were used and who used them, families, singles, couples. So that metric is going to really allow us to actually get a number, quantify that issue.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part. Have the information that's accurate and not be reactionary with hysteria, emotion, and all that stuff. Because no one is saying, I mean, if someone needed help, I would bend over backwards to help them. But I just don't know if we're just creating drama,
I think that actually is a worthwhile point to go back a little bit and say, you know, poverty numbers in Canada are going down because these responses are in place. Like, what is the trend that Canada has been pursuing has been working. Poverty is going down, and this is building on a trend and providing the support that, you know, it meets a family halfway. It reduces the cost, you know, a program that reduces the cost of childcare allows a parent to get ahead and their family can be more prosperous and work more. And like the food bank fits into there. If there's, you know, some difficulties, then you might not be stressed about where your next meal is coming from in your work, and you're then thinking about, okay, how can I build my skills and enter the job market or build my career. So I think what you're commenting on is you know, the approach is working. I think it's what I'd respond to, but what you had said previously is really relevant in that, you know, there are meeting the needs and concerns of the organizations currently, and, you know, the increases in counseling, for instance, that's a current need. But how are we thinking about building capacity in the future? And that's where I've heard a number of comments from council around this discussion that we haven't really gotten to, because we're talking about the current, like the grant funding needs of today and not about the future. So I don't want to take it off topic of the, you know, the report and the grant report that is written now, but I think, yeah, the next conversation is around building capacity and getting ahead of the problems of tomorrow. And I think that's where, you know, projects and proposals can be put forward that are a lot more, they're a lot more forward-looking and a lot more optimism. They're based around optimism for what the community can do.
I think that's it. Exactly. We should be forward-thinking. And a year ago, I said, typically mothers are going to stay home with the children. More with this COVID epidemic, female mothers are likely to be more impacted because they're going to give up their jobs to stay home with their children at home. we should have thought, okay, if we're gonna build our future, let's start thinking daycare. And get the daycare the best in Canada, or throw any money we get into a daycare system that's surpassing. And then I've had another conversation with Tracy Spandier at the community. She's in the daycare society, and I say, you build a strong early childhood education system that translates to a really healthy social child. It translates into the future. So those type of things should be where we should throw our money. We have a chance to a meal's one thing, but if we're thinking, let's go, we got $1 million or $1.5 million to really make an impact, let's take.
Now you're talking.
That's
All
what I'm
right.
saying.
So you want to assign all the money to a nice big social project?
I would say nail the social project. Pick a something, but don't just nickel and dime it, just because you're just.
And it's a long-term thing, right? I mean, because we did provide that $10,000 of emergency funding to the Child Care Society, and they were able to use that to increase their capacity. Their challenge is they don't have enough staff, like everyone else, right? Again, the staff they do have don't have anywhere to live. And if they do have somewhere to live, they're spending all their money on their living, and so they still need access to food banks.
So then that should be saying, okay, what's the problem daycare providers have? It's the low wages. Well, let's fix the wages.
Yeah, so what we actually do see in the community now around, the organizations in town are extremely innovative and they do a lot with a little. So there are a number of organizations that are thinking about this. And I think the community kitchen is a great example of that. It's the crossover of the social good that comes from it. That came out of COVID, where they provided, instead of just food bank food, they hired chefs to cook food, to make prepared meals, and provided it to residents at a cost far below any other possible meals. Like, I think their costs are down to $2 or $3 per meal for a really healthy meal. So they're seeing that was a social good, and then the economic good comes in the form of entrepreneurs want space to make finished food products and are looking for access to commercial kitchens where they can potentially build their business out of before they can lease their own kitchen space. So that's kind of that was the form of their social enterprise model. I think in the third kind of response, which is that longer term one, that's an area which is really ripe for exploring and could actually be incentivized by a program that's based off of social enterprise, which is how can we think about programs that are self-sustaining, that maybe the outlay of like the investment is coming from this grant program, but there's a business model, there's a community futures here that's ready to build your social enterprise business model with you and go in the direction of historically Revelstoke has actually been able to lead in this area and create the RCFC, which has been a profitable enterprise and model for the entire province. Like that sort of thinking can exist in a lot of different forms. The RCEC being a leader in environmental waste reduction and being able to heat buildings in the community, for quite a long period of time. There are models for doing this, and we even see it today in the form of the thrift store, which provides funding to the Queen Victoria Hospital, and they bring in profits that are high enough that they grant them to other community agencies when they can't use it all. So there's a lot of potential for that, and that's the direction we could look, and which would produce a little more of those tangible and
I'm looking for a multiplier. Just say this is the start, this will amplify, and this could be a 10-year outlook. What can we be?
I'm gonna stop you all right here, because one of the words that Jay Morrison said before he left was follow the rules of engagement here in this room, and we not talk over each other because we are being recorded. So I'm going to go back to, we're going to follow the protocol for the meetings. I want one of you to talk at a time. It's being recorded. Others are two other councils will be able to look at this and have that. I appreciate the conversation, but I really want you to talk one at a time so that I can hear everybody, but also we're recording. So I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to let you finish your conversation, and then you get to finish.
I'm all for using the money to bring it forward, to look to the future. Someone's got to have a dream or a big picture thing rather than the small things. To me, that seems like a waste of a lot of money that we've been seeded from the clouds.
Ms. McKay.
I think the one thing just to clarify or to bring everyone back to is that the original Safe Restart grant that the province gave to all the municipalities was intended to help the municipalities navigate through the cost of COVID, so lost revenues and increased costs. And that is predominantly what the city has used the money for, that the city received is for those purposes. A review of that has identified that there is some extra, there is potential to use some of the funding to assist some of the social community groups that have been impacted by the same things, lost revenue, additional costs. And they've had to, because of if we can help them by replacing lost revenue or help cover the additional costs they've had to spend, we can then free up those funds for them to use for their social programming, because they've had a reduction in what they can use for social programming, because they're trying to cover lost revenue, fundraising revenue for a lot of them, and then increased costs to respond to COVID. And so that way, there is a multiplier effect, because if we can replenish what they've been impacted by COVID with, then they can use that money to potentially support the community in a way that helps people then get out of their poverty situation or whatever their current personal situation is, whatever it is, it depends on which organizations want or apply to access the money. We don't know if it would be food bank or we don't know where it's going to go, childcare, counseling. We don't know what that's going to look like until we actually get those applications in. But there will be a multiplier effect out of this, because if we give them the money, they'll be able to then grow it by doing what they do, which is help the community get back on its feet.
Okay, Jackie.
Yeah, the only thing that I think is the flaw in that is that it assumes that we know the timeline of the impacts of COVID, which we don't. And it's still finite. So even if we have some small degree of multiplying effect, it's not like a continuous ongoing thing. And the uncertainty is what, at least in the meeting that I was in this morning at social development, that's the scary thing, right? Like, it's the uncertainty of all these shoes dropping at all the same time, and then going like, we had some funding, we're out of funding, and now all these big scary things are happening, and we don't know what to do. And so, like, even though it's a nice idea to give some of this money to cover some costs in the short term so that they can continue services, it doesn't actually do what Rob was saying and be like a little bit more forward thinking and have like an ongoing multiplier effect. So, like, I guess I'm curious, the 80,000 from your conversations, Ingrid and Taha, like, that wouldn't facilitate any of those agencies doing any kind of project alone, right? Or they wouldn't join up. It's like 10,000 max per organization, and that they would apply.
Yeah, and it would be as according to the rules of the restart grants, looking at their loss revenue. So we would have to report on that. Funding was earmarked for lost revenue.
Or increased costs.
Or increased costs. Yeah.
So, like, does it make sense, I guess, is the question for Mayor Sulz and for Rob. Like, do you guys think it makes sense to be providing more of this funding that's like good and going to be appreciated because any money is better than no money? Or should we like consider more creative solutions and assign more money to it?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, my perspective is that I don't think they're sustainable. Like, they're always going to be coming to the table because they're.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. If there was a sustainable.
Another 10,000.
No, I'm saying if there was a sustainable
Yeah,
idea.
and I say, so the question is, are we creating a series of entities that are dependent on government or funding models from elsewhere? Or can they make it on their own? I don't know if they can.
But that's where we turn around and we go back to Taha and we talk about social structure, and this is emergency funding, no matter how we look at it. is it a benefit? Obviously, we know it's a benefit to those that receive it. Long term, are we making a difference? Or are we compounding the problem as we move forward? Any input?
I would say that becomes a philosophical question about the whole way that Canada operates our social structure, which does rely in a significant way on the existence of a non-profit philanthropic sector. So we can address that question from the perspective of the city, which exists within that system, and say that we, as a city, we would like to encourage more of the innovation and sustainability of funding models within our community. That's where that would fit in. I don't think we're going to solve the problems that are created at the federal or the national level of this approach, but can we begin to build up sufficient and robust systems within the community? I think the answer is yes, and from what we've seen, there are a number of agencies that are taking that approach, and all the while recognizing that there are those emergent demands that this program is meeting, and if we're going to move to that next long-term consideration, then we're talking about two different needs. So those can be prioritized the way that the council sees fit.
And so for us as councillors, we think about if we have an overabundance of funding, and we've got that endless well of money to put into social programs, and we can take that step two to put in permanent way of doing it when we have a finite number, is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Rob, but are we doing the right thing by saying we're going to give 10 grand to each one of these and say, see you later, hope this helps? Or are we prolonging the issue down the road? Do we need to be looking at an alternative way of getting this funding out to the community? And I think both councillors are asking those questions.
Yeah, and I would say that traditionally cities haven't necessarily been in the position where they have to make these decisions, and that COVID restart funds are a bit of a unique opportunity for the city to participate as a funder. So I think by stepping into that funding realm, this city is kind of facing the same issues that a whole sector of regional funders, I would say. Oh, they play in this sandbox, right? They do this. They administer funds to the city in the form of the CBT affected communities grant that is yearly and that sees more demand than supply every year. And there are hard conversations that have to happen around the table at City Hall and in the committees who allocate that funding to say, to determine how to use it and how those needs can be met with the limited amount of money there is. If then, with the knowing that this is kind of a one-time opportunity, the priority is on beginning to build that capacity in a way that that has more long-term an investment mindset that pays returns, then that is kind of the direct. I think that is the question of which approach to favor or prioritize, and not necessarily having to pick between one or the other, but weighing those options. So I think the question at hand.
I just wanted to ask a question again, because I think initially the $80,000 that was being proposed for this phase two, or this kind of for the organizational survival bottom line was just that. It was the second phase, and we were still looking to funds 2022. for the long-term resiliency, right? So we're not making decisions necessarily about that today. But we want to do as much as we can for that, because I think it sounds like that's, yeah, because we had initially, I think, had a higher amount for the interim stuff, and we dropped it down. I think it made sense to put more, our recommendation was to put in for the long-term
Yeah.
investment and multiplier.
Well, I
That's
just
what
think,
I'm
yeah,
thinking too, like,
what would set us, what would take us to the next level?
yeah.
Pick a project, and, you know, I'm on the community foundation board as well, and there I said, you know, it's great that you disperse all this money to all these different agencies, but there's just, I don't know if it's enough to really push them to the next level, right? And so they're always on this lifeblood. They get this minimum amount that just keeps them going, but it doesn't.
I think that's like most.
I know,
nonprofits.
so, but if you did have something that you could champion, if there was $80,000 for one project that could hit a home run, why would you give all over and just keep everyone else on living sustainable, or, substance, instead of just really making a win?
Okay, I'm going to go to Tanya, and then I'll come back to Jackie.
So I hear what you're saying, and I understand it, and I'm of the same kind of view where it's nice to be able to have a bigger impact. The one challenge we're going to have in this particular sandbox is that there are the province provided criteria for what we could do with the money.
They were so loose.
They were, but
They were so loose.
But they're very specific about something that we couldn't do. And some of the things were like, we weren't allowed to use it to say reduce tax increase. We weren't allowed to use it for capital projects. So that does kind of restrict, but so the thought process for me anyways, and I know we've talked about this a lot, was that if we could help with a little bit here, then maybe it'll free up more money in another perspective. So we're going to help them shift money away from where they were putting it to where they want to put it by providing this instead, because this is what we can do within the allocation. It was very much about ongoing and current revenues and expenses and the way they were impacted by COVID. And so yes, this in itself may not have a huge impact, but if it allows them to take back funds basically that they had to use because of COVID or that they lost because of COVID, and then put those with other funds that they've got already, that might help them build those pots bigger so they can do something bigger. I agree, I do get also frustrated by this inability to use it for capital projects and things like that, because there's a lot we could do with it, but.
Go ahead, Jackie.
This is not a great end to see. I think a couple things I think what you were mentioning about freeing up capital is like similar to what Rob was saying, though, is that then it's like an individual agency thing that doesn't necessarily have like a big impact. That's not really taking any kind of bold action. That's like kind of creating these like long-standing impacts. And I don't agree necessarily in that, like, when I read through the Restart Fund requirements, I don't think we have any inabilities in how we can spend it in respect to social, like in some kind of social enterprise model, because it would eventually probably flow through one of the agencies, and we can provide money to an agency, and supporting vulnerable people is like part of what that money is supposed to do, or the people who are most impacted by COVID. So I think we can be like, this is a pretty cool opportunity to try something new. And I think one of the things that I was noticing in the report is like, it was good and thorough and makes sense that you would be looking to other municipalities and what they were doing and how they were spending it. But it doesn't really look at like what the need is in Revelstoke. It's all like these relative terms, which is fine. But if you want to try something bold and like cool and new, then, you're not going to find that in a comparative review of what other people are doing.
I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I think of the seniors. I mean, we're talking infants, so I'm going the other spectrum where I'm going pretty. There's such an opportunity.
Oh,
yeah. I just think there's such an opportunity, and I say, who's the futurist? Who's the dreamer to lay this all out? I say, there's so many opportunities there. And I say, tell us a story, and we'll jump in. We have the funds to jump in. And I say,
Ingrid.
we do have some stories. This is more in terms of the long-term resiliency
Yeah,
piece.
that's all.
And, is that up for discussion today, or are we trying to just look at that interim support?
No, we got two recommendations. The Safe Restart Community Grants Policy F18 be approved, and that will go to council. And then that the 80 grand of the Safe Restart funds be allocated for funding under that policy F18. And so,
I promise it's relevant to the motions. I would propose, based on this conversation, an amendment, or to either amend those, or to defeat it altogether, or that's, I guess, not an amendment, but just a point.
talking about the grants policy?
Yes, the grants policy and the 80,000.
So they're two separate recommendations, so we'll start with the
Okay, well,
grants policy.
but they're related because the
Yeah.
80,000 is related to the policy.
Yeah.
So if we defeat this motion, I would be interested in, and
You can make
I'm looking to
whatever
you because
recommendation
I kind of know where Rob sits, sort of, although it's a bit of a wild cannon, so you never know, but.
Maybe the question is, if we decline this, what's going to happen right now? All right, do they desperately?
So let's go to timing.
Yeah, is there a desperate need?
So let's talk about the policy first, so go ahead.
Yes, the policy is what I was going to talk about. I think if we have the policy in place, it's in place. And then if there's some uncertainty about amounts, that could potentially be reviewed. I think as staff, we were trying to come up with a bit of an interim measure. And before we know the final outcome of what the city needs to use the remaining restart funds for, because once we have a better understanding of that, which we should have sometime, hopefully by mid-year next year, that will give us what the money pot available is. There are some unintended consequences of COVID that I actually hadn't anticipated until I talked to BCAA, and that is non-market change shift for things like the resort. So a lot of those properties up there, $11 million of assessment value up there that was class 6 is potentially moving to class 1 because their assessments are split based on short-term rentals. And they didn't have a lot of short-term rentals in 2020, so they're all going to get a reduction in taxes in 2020. And the question is,
Will we give them more money back?
no, we're not giving any money back.
Right.
But the challenge is I got to manage that impact because I don't think it's fair to put that tax impact of that over all the other residential properties, right?
But we can't use this money to reduce taxes.
No, but it's a short-term revenue loss. So it's not reducing taxes, but
It's all the same pot.
it is an identifiable short-term loss of property tax revenue. So
Whatever you want to call it.
So
I
the
know.
policy, the eligibility criteria is a registered charity or nonprofit in good standing. So it's not like it's going to be going to any of
Oh, no, I
those
get it.
people, right?
Yeah.
And so my question is, I mean, I'm happy with the policy as a whole. And then, I'm going to recommend that we put that forward. But then, what do we do with these funds? How do you guys feel we should utilize these funds? Because this is going to be a recommendation to council, and all of us will sit around and we're going to beat this up again. But I want you to give some, what are you going to be able to do?
Policy's useless without the money, right? Or would it still be there for future money? Is that the idea?
that's the idea.
Okay, so in that case, I don't think the policy makes a ton of sense because it's pretty restrictive and doesn't, in my mind, leave a lot of room for any of these creative solutions. So I feel like whatever policy we end up passing is probably gonna have to change. So I would not be in favor of the current motion or current policy, and would also be not in favor of assigning the 80,000 because based on this conversation, it sounds like that money would be better spent going towards something a little bit more impactful. And I'd be interested in maybe referring that to your department, Ingrid, to see what that could be like. And I don't know, maybe the social development committee, based on all of the things that they're experiencing, would have some ideas and they could come up with some stuff. That's what I think. You love when committees come to you with ideas, right?
I see, yeah, I mean, we're just pitching an idea out there, but I just think that there are agencies that, I think already talked, what could be done there to turn the corner, and that would bode well for the rest of the community, for our future. And I said, geez, throw all kinds of support behind that. If it's seniors, we need to keep active, keep our city open to everybody, inclusive. We've got great activities for the young and enthusiastic and able, but we have nothing really that's keeping, and I said, there's an opportunity there. And I said, well, those programs, if they're created, here, I mean, I just think we need, but at the same time, I don't want to jeopardize anyone who's hanging on by their fingernails, right?
Okay, so this morning in social development, was this discussed around the table?
The restart fund?
Yeah.
No, because it was being referred to council. I think we just talked about the 80,000 really very briefly. But we had so much other stuff on the agenda that it wasn't really like its own separate line item.
So when you were going around the table today and having discussions, was there suggestions as to what can we be doing for the community from a financial perspective that will knock this out of the park?
I mean,
Any of you?
So I think, yeah, just to say that 80,000, I think that will make an impact. Like that will alleviate a portion of the suffering that has come around because of COVID. That's I
As
don't want to
proposed in our,
absolutely. I do stand behind that, and I think the program was devised and was the programs that were devised by other communities was to meet that need. Since we have moved just a little bit further away from the initial event, the uses for that they may not sound as emergent as lines. When we were talking in June, this was about lines going around the food bank.
Right.
And people waiting outside. That was a different level of emergency. But I don't think that this 80,000 is the motion that's in front of you is moot. I don't think we've moved past the need. So if it's
will they be missing the money? If we didn't do it right now and we focus more on the long term, would the agencies suffer? I think is the question.
I think it's very difficult to say without knowing, either having some discussion of what that other amount or what the pot is actually. Is this 80,000 is it a missed opportunity if this isn't pursued at all? Is it a missed opportunity if this is pursued and something else isn't at all? Those are the questions that I think are relevant to the reply. I don't think this I think this 80,000 is important. Every dollar is needed right now. So I think that's kind of where we start, right? Like we start in the social sector, we start with every dollar makes a difference. And from there, we can prioritize. If this is the only amount, then it's a different discussion than whether we're talking about a more significant pot of which 80,000 is what percent.
Right.
That's what got this.
Just how much funding do we have available from this restart 1.7 million?
So in the report, in the financial implications section, I did provide a projection of where we're going to be. So on the last page. So that 410 is where I'm projecting without, so the 80.
the end of 2022 is 410 balance.
So the 600
636.
is going to be spent on programs or lost wages or lost taxes, right?
That's actually, that's predominantly for
ourselves, for the city.
the city, particularly for the streaming that we need to put in place so we can do all those meetings.
So
it may not cost as much as what they're projecting. It might cost more.
Okay, go ahead.
To me, sure, that goes back to that nickel and dime. You can find the expenses, and we had $2 million to start with, and all of a sudden it's nothing.
Yeah.
And I say, so sure, we covered off all the things, but maybe we should bootstrap a bit and use the big project use this money, this pot of gold to turn it into a pot of platinum or something. I don't know, but it should have been something, we should have a better objective than just spending it on or masks or just, I just think there should be something that we could, I don't know what it might be, but I think there should be something better use forward looking.
So, you're gonna make that comment.
Yeah.
I want a suggestion.
I would say, I would talk to the daycare, early childhood society right now and find out how can we make this top program in Canada. And I say,
Okay, and I'm gonna tell you what the response is gonna be. We need employees.
so, okay, and then say, I would say, why don't you have it?
And they're gonna basically say, so I know with, now they're getting a base of $23 an hour, and it's been boosted by the government to $26 an hour for those ECE positions, right? They feel that that's reasonable, but it's not top of the line as far as an income goes, right? It's getting them through the process to get educated is onerous.
But then maybe that's it. Maybe we hire 20 kids who are interested in the program and say, we'll pay for your program.
Okay, Tom, and then Ingrid.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I guess I'd say if the conversation that council wants to have with the community or the input is that like to assess the types of ideas that are out there that can accomplish these sorts of outcomes. That's also a policy or a program that could be put together and that I think would be very much worthwhile because it would bring those ideas forward. I can, since we're being recorded, I don't want to divulge organizations' plans that may not have surfaced publicly yet. But I think there are actually a number of innovative programs that exist that could respond to that sort of program and would be worth exploring. Yeah.
Ingrid.
I think that was the intention was that looking at the budget that $100,000, out of the 2 million, which is a reasonable amount because it puts us in the realm of Nelson and other communities that we're also making that investment. 20,000 was given already, 80,000 targeted to that kind of medium term budget shortfall, helping the agencies based on standards and criteria that we're developing this policy. But the third part that we'd come back to is we'd form this working group. We'd start to vet some of these creative ideas. And we'd come back to council in 2022 when we know what that bottom line is. Is it 410? Is it 600? Is it 300? And then we have some actual feasibility, work done on, okay, here's 3 social enterprises we'd like to get support for $100,000 each. But we'll vet that idea through that. But I think right now it's on the table is this policy to allow medium-term funding to get out there. Doesn't mean we're going to spend it all. It just allocates some so that we can give it where it's needed right now.
Okay.
So I think that's great and it's very exciting and cool. The only way I would support the recommendations that are in front of us is with the understanding that, like, if the finance committee made a recommendation to council or whatever the friggin' process is, so that council can have that discussion as to what that number is that we would like to give as a rough guideline and a request for like a report that summarizes and investigates some big ideas, with like $500,000,
If you've got ideas, bring them.
So how do I, and this is like more of a process question, but how can I formalize that request?
If we recommend, number one, that the Safe Restart Community Grants Policy F-18 be approved, you're recommending, you're not saying that.
Sure, yeah.
And then council will go, okay, what amendments do you want to make before the policy goes into effect, right? Are you not happy with the policy?
Oh, no, it's fine. I mean, like, to me, the policy and this 80,000, those are totally separate conversations. So I don't have an issue with those, but what I would hate to see happen is for this to go forward to council, for council to have a similar but shorter, hopefully, discussion around the table about that 80,000, and then for nothing formal to be recommended to their department to come back with a bigger proposal. Like, I would hate for that conversation to go,
Okay.
so does that happen at the council meeting or here?
So the bigger, well, it can happen here. And so the bigger discussion's going to be, we've talked, there's been a proposal that X number of dollars be put forward to IT to deal with the things that we need to deal with as far as getting our IT stuff up and running because of COVID, right? Do you not want to do that? And so there's a dedicated amount of money for
Yeah, but
that.
that doesn't even include the 410,000. Like, the 410 is just sitting idle.
That's the balance at the end.
Unspoken for balance.
That's what I'm saying. So like, if we would at least say, that's kind of why I was inclined to not go ahead with the 80,000 if it wasn't like an imminent need. It's like, then you can kind of round it around 500,000 and then give them as a sort of rough line. This does not include the 80,000.
This is done before, so you can see the balance.
So, okay, maybe more like 300,000. Okay, well, either way, I think it makes sense to give some kind of guidelines.
Okay.
And I don't know if that happens here at council.
So I'm going to go back to number one. The policy basically states that if we're going to give money out to the community, there is a criteria. And basically, do you think that criteria is too rigid? And I'm asking that because I'm hearing from Tanya about what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. So be a registered charity or registered not-for-profit in good standing. And so here's the thing. I mean, if we're talking about the seniors, they're a registered not-for-profit or a registered charity. If we're talking about any of those groups, they're already registered. So if you're talking about the child care, they are a registered group, correct? Okay, so, I think by putting through the recommendation on the policy, we deal with that. And then the 80,000 are going to be, okay, do we give it to what's actually needed now? So community groups coming forward saying, that $10,000 is going to make a difference whether we survive or not survive. And I understand, Rob, your comment about are we just giving another lifeline? Or do we cut it and we move forward and give this money to something that's going to be more substantial? My question isn't going to be what's going to be the impact from I'm going to say political level. What's the impact going to be from a social level? Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that we're trying to get down to. It's like, are we going to make an impact where we're actually helping the bigger percentage of the community by giving a larger amount of money? Or are we going to make more impact by giving a small amount to a bigger number of groups? So, Todd.
May, when we're thinking about the balance, since the number 400,000 has been brought up, just like as a total, if we were thinking about an infrastructure project, that would be very small.
Right.
If we're talking about this sort of capital investment for the type of project that would get it off the ground, it's quite large. And there's, depending on what, even half of that would be quite large. Because what's different about that as the potential it presents to a group that is looking to establish a sort of social enterprise is that it's that kind of backing money to be able to go and finance the rest through a community futures or pursue, to kind of approach other funders and say, this is our initial investment. And this is our concept that we've developed. This is our business plan we've developed. What can the Columbia Basin Trust, how can the snowball start accelerating? So I think that, yeah, that they're just within that conversation. It might not seem like a lot, but it can have an outsized impact depending on the content.
Good.
I think it makes sense to move forward with what's in front of us. I think that the policy is good. We did a lot of work on it, and kind of we actually made it less restrictive, considering what we got initially from corporate. I think it'll support that interim function. It doesn't mean we're going to give out 80,000 at all, because there's all these criteria, and there's going to be a working group that's going to vet whether or not there is actually a need. So I think we could end up in a balance. Third, I would say that maybe, if anything, a recommendation be added to the report that says council directs our community development coordinator to, work on some long-term, wording, work on some long-term initiatives in partnership, with our stakeholders to bring back in 2022. And we will continue to discuss with finance whether there's any money left in the bank. And as you said, as you noted, when we go forward, that's going to be your job for next year, is to say, okay, so I may have 200, I may have 300,000. What can I leverage from CBT, from EOF, from all the other funding that is still going to be coming through the pipeline from different agencies? So we just need some seed money for the third phase. But right now, I think we just want to maybe put in a recommendation that council direct us to not forget about that third phase of resiliency and social enterprise.
Okay, so,
So I would make a motion to recommend that council directs community economic development, to bring a report forward in 2022 outlining proposals for a social enterprise model or a fund that would.
so let's just let Ingrid fine tune the wording here.
It's in the first.
Go ahead.
It's in the first report. June 22nd, we brought forward a report that said 3 options. First, residents alleviate the most impactful short-term stressors. Done. 20,000 done. For organizations, establishing retroactive COVID support funds for the nonprofit sector facing budget shortfalls. This is 80,000.
Right.
The third one was for the community, building capacity and resilience in the social sector. We're still talking about these 3, so I think we just refer back to that.
Yeah, good
Make
point.
sure this report is linked in this report, and we say council directs CDD, to return with a report addressing this third phase.
Okay, the finance committee is going to recommend that to council, and then council will discuss that and go from there.
And we include this report to make sure we capture more links to this, and we identify phase 1, check phase 2, in front of you, phase 3, tell us to go work on it, and we'll go work on it, and find matching funds.
Okay, so that recommendation is going to go forward if I get a seconder. Okay, so Rob's going to second that. All in favor? Okay, that motion is carried. Now, I'm going to go back. So those are the recommendations that report. You can fine tune that with Jen as far as the wording. I want to go back to the other 2 recommendations, and that is the community grants policy be approved. Okay, we're going to do that. And then that 80,000 that Ingrid's talking about, medium, which would be a good way to help the people that are in need. Now, are you both okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, so Rob's going to move them, Jackie's going to second them. So for the first one, the policy, all in favor? Motion's carried. Number 2, the 80 grand, motion's carried. Good. All right, so you got that, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay, Rob, you got your hand up, and then Jackie.
Just on the phase 3, sooner than later. If we had it up front, we might have more money. We can defer it from saying that we may have, instead of 400, there might be 600. We can make some choices, so sooner.
Sooner we can decide.
If we have a winner of an entity that to support, let's support it soon.
And so as Tanya just said, she just turned off the taps.
Yeah, my comment would be that there's definitely been
I know.
an adjustment in how the city is handling the costs. A lot of what we were dealing with initially was very one-time only costs or upfront costs that we weren't really anticipating in our budgets. That is now being worked into our ongoing costs because it's not going to go away. And so we're working that into our ongoing budgets
I think
with some
obviously-
impact, obviously, but yeah. And
Just-
then, sorry, and then,
You'll
So
get,
it's
you
just-
get a chance in a second.
it's just the larger one-time expenditures that will not be ongoing beyond, that are anticipated to be using these funds. And so one of them was the infrastructure, the one capital we're allowed to use, which is IT infrastructure. And then the other ones were, the firefighter, the flex firefighter, because they're having to stay home more when they're sick, when they never used to. They need that extra body, and I'll let the chief speak to that. And then the other one was bylaw enforcement as well. So that's the only, the staff has worked really hard to restrict and reduce the city's need for these funds so that they can be freed up for things like this. Because I think we've all heard from you guys that you do want to do this. So that's what we're trying to enable as much as we can.
Good, thanks, Rob. Now you can-
I would just say, every business in town has had to
Yes, yeah,
bite the bullet, right? So why would we got extra money,
yeah.
why wouldn't we be able to use on something really interesting and productive? Why wouldn't we face the same problems? So, what gives us, we've got money from the province, but it's $2 million to utilize. Let's go after something big.
Okay, good. I appreciate those
Yeah.
comments.
I was just gonna say that when we have this conversation at council, which is gonna be soon, right? Because it'll be probably on the next agenda.
Probably a couple down the road. Yeah.
December.
Oh, yeah, good enough. Soon enough, that's in a couple weeks.
December 9th is the next,
Oh,
the council
sorry,
meeting.
that's 21st.
I don't
Okay,
know,
well-
it might be the 21st, because we definitely have a full agenda, I believe.
Okay.
So December 21st.
Anyways, point is, when we have that conversation, I just want to mention that part of that has to be, I think, in order for the report that we get in return to be productive, some discussion around what we're willing to generally assign versus the cost of the IT and all that stuff.
Perfect. Okay,
I think, yeah, the third point.
and then Ingrid.
Just to set, make sure the expectations are lined up properly. I think examples of projects would be suitable to bring forward of what types of projects are ongoing or in that phase where they could use the funding to accelerate them. But I think I would propose maybe the outcome of this sort of third phase is a program and an application program of sorts, because there might be opportunities that CD has not fully identified or vetted that could come forward as part of the process. So I think, the examples could come forward just to give you the tangible example of what could be and what is going on in the community. But just that council could choose to allocate those funds and make the final decisions of the yay or nay, but the intake process is sort of the policy that I think would be good to work on so that it could collect all of those.
And I think that's what we're asking you, Todd, is to actually do that. Bring forward what you would suggest a process for the communities, maybe some projects that may be doable, and then there'd be an application process, because who knows, Joe Blow out there might come up with something that goes, this is going to be an absolutely stunning thing if we can get funding off the ground, and then the decision will be for council to make as far as funding. Right?
Do good venture fund.
Yeah.
I think I'll work with you, Tanya, on that third resolution to direct CD to explore blank. And I think in the discussion, we'll link it back a bit more to this June report and say that we're looking at a third phase that is going to come back to you with examples, with intake process, with flexibility, with matching opportunities for funders. We could put some of that in the discussion without tying our hands, so they know where we're going with it. So this is the reference to third phase of all. But this report does. This is about all three phases, and this report doesn't even mention it. So we need to bring this into it again, and we can provide that third recommendation that just directs staff to do that due diligence and vision.
And I think that's what we're looking for, so I appreciate that. That's good. I appreciate you guys having that robust conversation. All right, as stunning as budget to actuals are, I think we need to move on to it. So, Tanya?
Oh, you don't want to have a intense discussion of the budget actions?
No, you do, and we're willing to listen.
I don't know. So this is up to third quarter, 75% of the way through the year. It's the revenues, as you can see, are almost fully collected, which they normally are at that point in the year because the bulk of our revenues do come in the middle of the year. The only exception you'll see, permits and licenses and fines is over budget. In other words, they collected more than we budgeted for by quite a significant amount, which is great. But sales of service is under at the moment, and so that will be partly because the third quarter revenues for utilities aren't in there yet, and then also be partly an impact from the community center and the reduced visitation there. And then on the expense side, everything should be sitting around the 75% mark. Some exceptions would be the public health and social, because CBT grant money is in that line. And so that's already all been given out. So it looks like it's fully spent, and it pretty much is. That's the bulk of that. That's the cemetery and CBT for most of it. So that's normal. And then the other ones, economic development is under for some reason.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And this maybe is for our conversation tomorrow, but is this total before or after you had brought out the restart funds that were allocated to our department?
I think it's after.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, is it before or after the RMI funds, the 300,000 we're putting into capital for RMI? So that will bring us back to, that'll, I think so.
Yes, there's a lot of expenditures that will come back up into this because there's RMI funds being used.
And they're going to be transferred at the end for capital, 300,000 for
So
capital.
that brings us probably closer to the 75,
Yes,
because it looks like we're under.
Yes.
And then last of all, there's some EOF funds that we have the ability to defer to next year, and that's where some of the restart funds will punish. We're going to defer them to next year, so it would go into deferred revenue. So we will, it doesn't look like we have, I just want to make sure that we're not expecting that we're giving $1 million out of our budget back.
No,
Okay, good.
no, you're not. You will be spending it, I know you will.
Okay, thank you.
And then the other one that's still under at this moment is the transfers to reserves, which is the last line. And that's because while we do a monthly transfer now for the ones that are set amounts.
Yep.
So a lot of the transfers are set by budget. There are some transfers that are not set by budget, and that would be for the utilities and then for the vehicle and equipment. Their surpluses go into their reserves, their respective reserves, and that's not in here at this point. I looked on the utility side. At the moment, it looks like it might be about $2 million more of that. I didn't look at the equipment yet.
What do you mean $2 million?
Like there's about $2 million in surplus in the utilities that's designated to go into reserves that I haven't recorded because I don't actually know what, I wait till the end of the year to see what the final number is. Yeah, so that's why that number is a little bit under as well. Protective service is a bit under as well. That's partly because they've got a pay raise that is not reflected in these numbers yet. So we budgeted for it, but we haven't actually paid it.
On the transfer to reserves, so our objective for this year is $5.7 million.
Yes. That's the estimate. Yes.
And the excess tax revenue over expenditures is how much? I'm sorry, so of that 5.7, what's from our tax, what's the surplus of our operating surplus?
So there isn't, we don't budget for an operating surplus, we budget for it to be exactly zero.
Yeah. So, usually what happens if you do it, you transfer it.
I could, yes. So there are certain, part of our policies allow for certain things. So for example, the surplus in the planning, the extra revenues they've created, the policy then would allow me to transfer that additional unbudgeted revenues that we received into the stabilization reserve fund. The same thing happens with snow removal. If they spend less, then I can transfer the unspent budget over to that reserve fund as well. When they spend more, snow removal in particular, like they did in 20, not in 20, what year are we in now? I'm sorry, to lose.
2021.
When we did the 2020, I actually had to take a big chunk of money out of that financial stabilization reserve because snow removal budget was considerably over. So
So generally though, we contributing, the transfer to reserve has been growing over the last number of years.
Not the budgeted amounts that we're budgeting to transfer. There is some slight growth, but there hasn't been a huge increase.
4.9, now we're 5.7 last year.
Yeah, and part of that would be the extra money for the transportation infrastructure reserve, the extra 2% that was added 2 years ago, and then the 1%.
I'm just trying to sort of track
Yes.
our increase
Yes.
in the contributions.
They're
So we're
definitely-
adding each year to the reserve.
We are adding each year to the majority of the reserves.
And it's not the same proportion each year for increasing the percentage we're adding to.
I didn't increase the other transfers to reserves, just for transportation infrastructure.
But it
And
translates to a dollar amount that's growing. That we're moving significantly more into the reserve every year.
that's that,
And
yes.
that's how we fund our capital
It is.
projects.
I know, and that's great.
And it's in response to the debt management policy, which states
Yeah.
we build
We do
reserve.
that, yeah.
And
build
our
reserves.
15-year capital plan.
All right, any questions on budget to actual, any further questions? Seeing none? I know it's not on our agenda, but I just wanted to ask about fees and charges. We're going to see that come sometime soon. To the Finance Committee or directly to council? or what?
It was going to go directly to council.
Okay.
That's with administration as to what meeting they want to put it on.
Okay.
I think there was some discussion about the last one, but maybe the next one. Probably the other one that we should probably touch base on a little bit is the conversation about the timeline for the budget discussions.
Yeah, let's do that.
I heard from you guys last year that it was a bit onerous to talk about things twice. Once in
Yeah.
Finance Committee and once in Council. And so what I've proposed to administration is that we actually just have special council meetings for budget discussions, and we just do it that way. And so that would start in January, and then so the plan would be to alternate with council meetings, so the opposite weeks. We'll see how much we can get through, and the other plan is to, my takeaway from the budget process last year was that it was a bit challenging because you're getting all the individual components and then you get the big picture. So I'm going to try to reverse it a bit and bring it all to you as one big picture so you can see the overall impact, and then we can discuss what's creating those impacts within the different areas, and then you can have a conversation, you guys can have a conversation about what that is and how you feel about it. Yeah, so I'm hoping that'll help improve the process. That's the idea.
One of the things we have been asking for the last number of years is service level conversation. So we don't have that conversation. And it's very difficult. You build a budget and say, oh, this is a service level, this is the way it is. And I say, well, yes or no. Do you want to give them the money or not? And I say, well, we don't get into the service level discussion. And I say, maybe there's some changes. Maybe there's some things that we see on the ground, but I don't know if we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
And we can't have it with every department. My take is that it used to be a council with CAO or yourself, and this interaction should be just back and forth. And getting every, like, the systems that have been in place in the past, where each department presents their thing, and they're trying to absorb all their information, all their, their story, what's happening in their world, and you're trying to make a rational decision on the big picture, it doesn't cut it. Right?
Well, Tanya's realized that's kind of bring the big picture forward. And the downside of the way we were doing it before is if you're the last one to present, you're the last one at the trough, right? And we look at that sort of thing and go, okay, so if Tanya's department's the last, she ain't getting enough, right? And so if we look at the big picture, we can ask each department, or we can ask Tanya and James to say, okay, so we want to talk about service levels in some of these other departments. How does that impact? And then, so we can have that, but let's have a conversation once and have it around the table. And then I think that's a benefit as we move forward.
So service level is one level of conversation we need to engage in. And I would suggest that we've had it with various departments. The other thing we need to touch on is capital. And I say capital expenditures. And I say, in businesses that I've been involved in, there's always a must-have and a like to have, and need to have.
Gotta have.
And I say, we don't get that conversation. We just get, this is what we want, this is what we're going, we need to do the paper, whether we hear. Yeah.
Well, I think
and I
so.
say- and then they defend it. And I say, well, that was a nice luxury, but is it essential? Yeah.
Well, and so you just gave Tanya that, so when she's meeting with her department, she can basically say, these are the three things that we want to talk about. Nice to have, must have, ain't never gonna have. That sort of thing. That's our decision.
Yeah, and I say they present it. So we're for the capital budget. This is part of the discussion. We have the, the departmental needs and service levels. We should have that conversation. We should also have a conversation about the capital. And say we should be building reserve to replace all this stuff. But eventually, we should say maybe there's a different way, or maybe you don't buy used or you don't buy new. There's many different ways we can talk to it. We just haven't had it done. It seems like in the past it's been very disjointed.
And I don't disagree. I think we can do that. So I'm going to go back to Tanya's conversation about meeting with council and special council meetings. So what were you thinking? Can you kind of give us an idea? So we have council 1 week. The next week we would have the special council meeting for finance. I know it's a bit onerous, but we're kind of dealing with the budget and we need to get that done. I personally would like to see this more on board where we get it done a hell of a lot sooner than later, and that we're actually that we're giving direction. We're getting into the new year, and of course there's always that sort of thing where we look at it and go, okay, so now we're approving things after they need to buy them, that sort of thing. And so we want to have those conversations as quickly as we can. That work for you guys?
Yeah, I'm with you. But another thing I've been asking for from James is a staff, or from Don, from on down the line, is a staffing review or staffing needs review for staffing. I'd say that needs to be laid out to us as well. I mean, I don't know if we.
So James is working on those with his department, so he's got a handle on that.
Yeah, and I say that's, we 3-4 years into it, we still.
Well, you're going to see that. It's in the works.
Yeah.
All right. Anything further that you need from us, Tanya?
No. That's it. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback because the idea is to constantly be improving the process. So it actually helps you guys get you the information you need and helps you make the decisions that you need.
Good. All right. So in light of that, I'm going to ask for a motion to terminate. Jack and Rob.